Okay, I would like to call to order our planning, really our first of the year, planning and zoning meeting. It is 3:38. And so our first order of business is the discussion regarding section 155, 1327, technical studies. Jonathan.
That is Mr. Kendry, and I believe he's on his way, so if you maybe.
Oh, okay, so that is his.
Skip number 2.
Okay, so we're gonna skip over that. Okay, let's discuss permitting schools in AGC, AGC 1, and OI.
This one should be relatively straightforward. You all voted on first reading already, and you did slightly amend it in that first reading approval. So what you have before you is the modification to that based on that motion. So this would allow schools to be permitted by right in the AGC, ABC 1, and OI districts. Currently, schools are permitted as special exceptions in all 3 of those districts, and staff supports that change.
Does this fix everything that the schools, like I know Clover and maybe one other school had issues? Does this fix it, or was there a second step to fixing their expansion at Bethany?
Go ahead. Oh, sorry, it looked like you were going to say something. Yeah, so this should address, so a lot of those schools are, they fall in these districts, and they are what you would call existing non-conforming. So they would have to get a special exception and go through that process in order to do any expansion. So this negates the need to do a special exception.
And just regarding Bethany,
Yeah.
it did go through that process, and actually the approved plans went out today.
Oh, that's great. Because they chose, basically what happened is they chose not to wait on us to do this. They just go ahead and get the special exception. So, okay. But that's good. Okay. So on this, so does this need to come to council now, or is this, have we already?
It'll go to council for second reading.
Second reading, okay, all right.
Okay, all right. Well,
Straightforward.
As straightforward as it gets.
okay, so do I have a motion that we?
We don't
have to do a motion?
No.
Okay. Okay, moving right along. The continued discussion.
The long continued.
The continued discussion regarding proposed tree conservation changes.
Okay, bear with me, because this one's going to take some explaining, and there's lots of math involved.
Math.
Say math?
Oh, a map. Oh, I love maps.
Math.
Oh,
Math.
what? What?
Numbers.
Math, not math.
Oh, math. Oh, okay. All right. But it does kind of have a map.
All right, so you should have in front of you Exhibit A, and it's got 2 components to it, so 2 items that are on this list today. So the first couple of pages here are draft changes that we've put together for the tree conservation ordinance. And just so we can all follow along, I'll kind of go in order of the changes, and the changes are in red here. So on the first page at the bottom where you say E, that talks about maintenance, so that's just clarifying some language about how trees are to be maintained when they are, when they fall under one of the categories of protection. So that's just some clarifying language there. When we get down to number 3, where it says non-residential tree save requirements. So this is the part that was originally in RECODE, and you all talked about wanting to revisit the topic. So that's the non-residential tree save requirement. So you might be aware that in residential districts, there is a 20% tree save requirement. So this would add for any non-residential development a 15% tree save requirement. And our landscape architect actually put together a pretty good exhibit for this. And I apologize, we only got 1 sheet of that. But essentially, the existing conditions would have covered 92% of this entire property with trees. So there would have been just a little bit that wasn't covered by tree. So this is what 15% tree save looks like. So, you know, that's with a site that's almost entirely wooded. So it's not that you need to have 15% of the property be covered in trees, it's just however many trees are on the property, you just need to retain 15% of that for the commercial development. So he drew out what that might look like on a typical commercial development, and the scale here is a 6-acre site. So you might reserve some additional trees in the back of a lot and then utilize some of your existing trees for your buffer that's required anyway. So that's what that looks like.
So the more heavily wooded a lot is, the more trees is gonna remain on it.
That's right. And so for this particular example, this lot was almost fully covered in trees, so it would have been 92%, and this is what that 15% leftover looks like.
What you mean it would have been 92%?
So this lot, this 6-acre lot,
Mhm.
was entirely green, except for a small area that wasn't green, that would have been field or something like that. So, for a site that's almost, yeah, there-
It doesn't help much, but that's a.
yeah. So that's what it
So
would
this
have-
is like the maximum that anybody would have to save.
Right.
Look, this is the
Just about,
maximum,
Just about, yeah.
the maximum tree save, okay.
Any other questions on that?
No.
All right.
Now,
You-
one question, one just popped in my mind, just trying to think out loud. So if some of our other requirements as far as parking goes, and they say, well, look, I just can't save that many trees, then what? If we're requiring, if you go with, well, obviously, meeting the setbacks, meeting the parking requirements, meeting some of the other things that we put in there, if the 15% is not doable,
Yeah, so
based
they have,
on
yeah,
the-
they have two options if they, and that applies for any requirement if they can't meet it. They either redesign their site to meet it, or they would ask for a variance because there's something unique about their site that makes it too challenging to accomplish that.
So,
Or a waiver from the
but,
planning commission.
but the parking requirement and the tree requirement, the tree save, they don't they're generally not gonna conflict with each other, right? Like we're not gonna come back and say, well, you don't have enough parking now because you're having to save the trees, so that.
I mean, you need so many site elements as part of your development plan, and you need to plan for all of it. But there is some overlap for tree save in particular, so you can utilize some of your tree save for any required open space, and for your buffers that you're planning, you can double dip essentially.
Okay, I got you. So they can be used as part of the buffer, like that, like you
As long
can
as
make
it
that
meets-
your buffer
yeah,
and
so
say
long-
that you've
as long as
saved
it
those
meets
trees.
the minimum
Okay.
depth and size standards of tree save, yeah. On the next page, you see an exhibit that's got some arrows talking about residential tree save, kind of breaking it down into 4 different areas. That's currently in our code and has been in the code for quite some time. Developers tend to have an issue with breaking them up into 4 different pieces, and typically they will have tree save along the perimeter because it's part of their required buffer anyway. But there's an issue with fragmentation. So the larger your segments of forest are, the better it serves as habitat, and you don't have wildlife trying to cross to different sections. So the more we can do to reduce fragmentation, the better. So that's why we're recommending to remove that requirement to break up tree save into 4 distinct areas. So you still have to provide your tree save up to the 20% in residential areas, but you would no longer have to dedicate them to 4 distinct areas, if that makes sense.
I do agree with that.
Okay. Now we get to the complicated part. So, grand tree mitigation, there's a couple of different ways that you can get approval for grand trees to be removed. There's administrative, there's waivers from the planning commission, and in either of those instances, you're required to provide mitigation. And currently, the only way you can mitigate the removal of a grand tree is by planting new trees. So there are sites that are large, very wooded, and might have scores of grand trees on them, and it would be very difficult in a lot of those instances to replant the number of trees necessary to recoup the loss of the grand trees that might be coming off of a site. So the idea with the changes that we've added here would be to give some flexibility, some different options for mitigation. So some in the development community had suggested, well, what if you provided more tree save than is normally required? And that makes sense. So you're removing a grand tree, but now you're preserving an extra area of other smaller trees to make up for that loss of tree canopy. So that seemed like a good addition to add in there. Retaining the ability to replant new trees, and then also adding a third option where if you site-wise don't have the space to make either of those options work, and those would be the two preferred options. So keeping trees on the site. If you couldn't make that work, that you would have an opportunity to do a fee in lieu payment to a York County tree fund. So the mathy bit comes in that table towards the bottom where it says cumulative deviation of removed trees. So want to be able to have the flexibility to mix and match some of those options. So if you're able to accommodate some additional tree save above what you're already required to do, and you can do some replanting of the site, but you can't meet the full requirement, the full mitigation requirement with just those two options, that any of the leftover you'd still be able to do a fee in lieu. So you'd be able to kind of mix and match those three different options as long as you reach the full threshold of mitigation.
And that fee goes into planting trees elsewhere? It's
Yeah,
still.
So further on, the last page of the tree section here was 154-206, York County Tree Fund established. All of the payments that will be collected for the fee in lieu of mitigation would be dedicated to those 5 purposes there, and those 5 only. So you couldn't put it into the general fund or anything like that.
I didn't like the idea of the fee when this initially came up a while back. I like staff having the flexibility to say, okay, well, if you're gonna have to take out an additional grand tree, you can do more tree save over here above and beyond what's the requirement. But I just don't, it just doesn't sit well to say, well, just because you cut that tree down, we're gonna charge you a fee or you can pay a fee. I would much rather staff have that discretion that you put in here to give that option to, hey, what about just saving some more trees in lieu of, but not a fee in lieu of, more trees in lieu of, instead of a fee. Because I don't want anybody to feel like, well, I could have saved more, I could have done more trees, but planning didn't go for that, so now I'm gonna have to pay. I'd rather have the trees versus the fee.
Let me give you a real live example. So the one of the developers that's building on Highway 274, he's got a lot of grand trees. He could never, if he cut down those trees, he would have to plant hundreds of little 2-inch trees all over there. So, but in talking to him, what he wanted to try to convince me of was, well, what if I put some trees somewhere else? Like, what if I, like, he can't go on somebody else's property and plant the trees, but what if he could basically fund those trees? In other words, what could he, I mean, I think it's kind of this, could I donate trees to this other area? And so I think that's kind of what this is, but I think it's an option. I don't think many of them will do it. I think most of them are just going to plant their trees. They're going to plant a bunch of tiny little trees on the property. What I would love to see them do is plant a little bigger trees in place of a 2-inch tree. They plant a tree that's already a little bigger than that. But
Well, I've gone through something similar with this, with a guy that was building a home. You got to remember, these little 2-inch trees or 3-inch, they cost like the dickens.
Yeah.
There's no such thing as cheap, and I understand not replacing a grand tree. I would much rather have a bigger tree save requirement in lieu of that tree versus falling back to a fee. Because one thing for sure, if you took down a couple grand trees, there's no way they can ever make that up, or that cost would be so big, making up several grand trees in these smaller 2 inches. But I do like the fact that staff has the discretion to add some more additional tree save area to compensate, because you never know where these streets are gonna land. You never know how the whether it's commercial development or residential development, how they've kind of slated for it to go. And instead of somebody going back and redrawing a whole development or neighborhood, they're gonna wanna take that tree out. But they should have the flexibility to save more trees. I just don't like the fee component that we.
You just think it sounds bad?
Because justify, well, you told this tree, you cut this tree down, but we're gonna go 5 miles down the road and plant another. The logic of that is not really, doesn't really satisfy that.
Yeah.
To me. But,
What do you think, Jonathan? I mean, what do you, like,
well, give me an example. What's a fee gonna be? What's the fee gonna look
Yeah.
like?
So if you go back to that table, similar to other types of bonds and things like that. So for example, we have a sidewalk bond, and the developer has to give us a cost estimate for what that bond to build that sidewalk would be, and then we hold that until they actually build the sidewalk. So similar concept here, the fee would be based not on a per tree basis or anything like that, because that gets way too complicated and hard to justify. But it would be an estimate that they would get from a company that would be supplying them trees, a nursery, for the cost to actually buy the trees that they would have to plant. So they give us that cost estimate, and that is what we use as the fee in lieu. So they would essentially pay the same amount to either plant the trees or to put that into the York County Tree Fund, no matter which way they're doing it.
So it's gonna cost them the same either way.
That's right.
Now, I thought you was gonna say, well, we'll figure out if the estimate comes in, this is gonna be X number of dollars, and we take a percentage of that. That may have made a little more sense, but if this guy's gonna pay 10, 20, 15 grand to replace trees, whether he pays it and put them on his property, or pay that same fee and you take them somewhere else, that's really no,
but he might not, but he might be happy to not put the trees on his property. Like that, because he's gonna have more space if he doesn't have to put the trees on his own property.
And really, they're in the order of our preference. So we would, if a developer came in and said, well, our site's too small, we just want to pay the fee, just tell us what it is. Our reactions would be, well, tell us why you can't make additional tree save area work. Tell us why you
Right.
don't have the space to replant the trees, and then we'll talk about fee level option.
Because some developers would like to buy their way, that's what this guy was wanting, he'd buy his way out of having to plant these trees. To thinking that I was gonna want them down on one of my other green spaces down there, and I'm like, well, I don't want you to take that tree down at all, so, but,
you're a tree hugger. Go ahead in a minute. Cause I work at a paper.
I like
plant. You cut
granola
down
and
trees
everything.
like-
Okay,
yeah, we on the opposite ends of the.
So just the
Cutting down
newbie
trees.
here, let me get this straight. So if the person can't plant, he can't change his plans or whatever, and he's got to go the route of either, so his next step is he's gonna pay to plant trees elsewhere. Or y'all are gonna talk to him about that and try
Well,
to work
they
his
would-
plan
they would-
around?
Yeah, so they wouldn't pay, there wouldn't be a direct, well, I'm gonna pay to plant trees over there. in that
Goes into
single
the
moment.
fund.
It would go into the tree fund. and
Right,
then
yeah, that's what I mean. It's
then
gonna
the
go
county would
into,
make a
it's not
decision.
gonna just, you're not gonna blow it. Right, you're gonna put it into a fund, okay.
That's right.
I got you. Okay, so, but you are gonna work with him to try to get something, arranged or whatever. Maybe his plans, redo his plans or whatever, give him the option.
Yeah, exactly, that's exactly right. So the preference is to do the first two options, and if
Mhm.
those prove to be impossible, nothing's impossible really. But if it just proves to be too difficult, maybe the site is 1 acre and the whole thing is covered with grand trees, and they just don't have the space to make it work, either additional tree save because they don't have any other trees, they're all grand trees, they all gotta go. They don't have the space to replant the new 2-inch trees, and they've got to plant 300 of them. They don't have the space for that. Then that's when the FELO comes into I would
Okay,
suspect the vast majority, especially residential development, they're gonna come in and they're gonna have, areas where they can add more tree safe.
Mhm.
okay, I'm gonna ask a really stupid question. Okay, so the 2-inch trees, can they can plant a little bit larger? Okay, so it's not that you're just saying, you gotta plant 100 2-inch.
Now, we don't dictate size of mitigation plantings. I will say that 2 inches is kind of the industry standard because, and I've learned a lot since we've hired a landscape architect, is that trees are hardier and they're better able to survive being relocated when they're that small. The
Mhm.
larger they are, the more likely they are to die.
Right, okay.
Question, and this has come up in a prior situation we were involved in. How are we calculating the replacements? Caliber inch, or what's the other term that was used?
Diameter breast height. So DBH is the term, so it's the diameter at 4.5 feet in height.
Now, the guy gave, the example that I was given was like, okay, if I have to replace 30 inches of trees, if I'm putting out, so that's 15 2-inch trees. We know these trees are gonna grow in diameter. Why don't we use some kind of calculation that I'm not replacing exactly 30 inches because this tree is gonna do this as it grows?
Yes, and we do exactly that. So,
Okay.
all of the ratios for the 3 options are based on a 0.75. So it's hard to do that with tree save, but that's essentially the calculation we worked out with the square footage. But whether you're doing a fee in lieu or planting new trees, you're not doing, you're cutting
Inch for
down a
inch.
30-inch grand tree and replacing it with 30 inches of new trees. It's 75% of that.
Okay,
And so there's an inflection point, right? So those trees do continue to grow, and at some point, those number of replantings are gonna have a bigger canopy than the lost grand tree did. And so we calculated that the average grand tree versus the average growth rate of 2-inch trees for a standing species, and roughly that inflection point is about 15 years.
So Bump and I went to, we took a little tour, we went up into Belmont one afternoon, and kind of what he's probably thinking, and me too, was they had planted, it wasn't York County, but it was, you know.
we crossed the line.
It was, we did cross the line that day, and but what they had done is they had planted, like, there was a magnolia, and then right beside it was another tree, and I told Bump, I said, those 2 trees, it's going to be survival of the fittest, because in 10 years or however
It's
long,
gonna take over.
there's only been 1 tree here, you know, or that was going to be, that one's going to be grown into the magnolia, so it wasn't a positive outcome long term. So I think is that what you were talking about, where it's
I remember that example, but I had
Yep.
another individual question, how were we calculating
Okay.
the replacement?
Yeah.
Is it inch for inch, or, but like in this case, you said it's
75.
75, okay, gotcha, that makes sense.
Okay,
So I've got for the trees.
Is that-
Okay.
okay.
Now, can we make sure this trees don't ever get back on here for another 2 or 3 years? 'Cause we've been going through this
Somehow
tree
I
thing
don't
for a
know.
while.
Do I do a
Yeah,
motion?
I think, do we need to
A motion.
vote on that at all?
I think you do, because that's not done through first reading.
Okay, all right.
Okay.
So I make a motion that we approve the, what do I call it? Just the updates to the, the tree conservation, ordinance.
I'll second.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye. Okay.
Okay, moving right along. Now, let's go, we want to go back.
We can go to the events, just go down, make Kendra laugh since he was late.
That's what he was hoping.
He needs a few minutes, but.
I tried, they.
Are you ready?
I'm ready.
Okay, well, let's do it.
Well, let's
Thank
do it. Okay.
Debbie, thank you. This is a matter that was addressed in part before you took office, was a presentation to this committee, and it's received first reading by title only. The concept on this technical studies amendment that is in our recode provision, it's a new provision under the recode, which allows council, the zoning board, planning commission, staff, even in the zoning compliance context, to require more information from an applicant that is seeking some component, rezoning, let's see what else, zoning compliance, a variance before the boards, or a special exception application. And currently, there are some studies that are required as part of a proposal, but this expands the scope of potential uses for these additional reports beyond the limited context that is applying now. In the rezoning application, it's limited to special districts or amendments to the special district. So that would include, I might need to be corrected by the planning staff, but certainly special exception operations. What else is considered a special district?
The special districts are mixed-use planned development and the business and technology park. So those, all three of them together are categorized as special districts.
Thank you. That would expand to any rezoning application, development, and it's not mandatory. It's limited in as a permissive. It may be required or requested to evaluate the impact of that development, new development application on some aspect of the development or access points to the development. Recently, a question arose regarding a trucking operation impact on the roads of a planned distribution center. So what was typically and historically a rural road accessed by residents that are further down the roadway, there was proposed a truck-intensive development. And the question arose whether the road width, depth, access to the neighboring thoroughfare was sufficient. And it was determined that there needed to be an assessment of the access to the roadway area, and the developer recognized that need and agreed to work with the South Carolina Department of Transportation to kind of make access to that roadway less severe and strict, and are looking at I guess providing a wider berth for the trucks to come into the roadway, and also assessing the width of the roadway so that two trucks can pass on a more narrow roadway. That's a great example of a impactful development, changing the complexion of a otherwise rural setting.
I'm familiar with that.
Okay, wonderful. So in the rezoning context, the first reading was given to expand that scope so that the council and other agencies of the county could have the opportunity to say, you know what, this is an interesting proposal for a rezoning or an application, but we need more information that we're getting under the routine analysis being provided with applications.
Right.
So the request in this rezoning, in this technical studies change is to expand the application of those studies. It's still discretionary with the board. For instance, the zoning board could grant a variance application, but they could make a condition to have this technical study come forward if they had some concerns, and make that a condition of the grant of the variance. And then lastly, I left out probably the most important part, adding a new provision that spells out implementation of the reports, the technical studies conclusions. So if the technical studies said you needed to widen a roadway for 1,000 feet by 2 feet, then that would be a condition if the reviewing body decided that was significant and persuasive enough, they would make that a condition of the approval. So that is what this technical studies ordinance amendment proposition is about.
I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
Is it connected to the TIA, or is it like a?
It is separate and distinct from the TIA.
It is, okay.
Yes.
Okay, so it's, okay. So has this hasn't been before council on first reading or anything? Is this the first, is this?
First reading by title only, as I understand, it was
Okay.
given first reading by title only, but, because of the transition in membership and questions that were raised the last time. we
Okay, so
went over
who
it.
does this technical study?
Well, that's a great question. I think it would be up to the requesting entity and the applicant themselves to select an appropriate, company to assess the specific need.
Okay,
So
so,
do we need to vote though?
yep, but, well, can I still discuss?
Yeah.
We still
Okay.
discuss it, I haven't said anything.
Hmm?
We still discuss it, 'cause I haven't
Okay,
said anything.
so-
It could be, it could be, these are the 5 things we need, select an appropriate company to
Right,
provide that report.
I mean, that's what I'm saying, because they may have their brother-in-law.
They may.
And
Do
there's,
this.
there's actually an existing provision that states that before they start the study.
Yes.
The planning director has to verify the qualifications of the person that they've selected to do the study.
Excellent, okay. But it's gonna be 2 separate studies then that would come before planning. Could be,
Yes,
TIA
maybe
and the
TIA
technical.
in conjunction with that, and maybe the same company might be able to do both, but yes, they're separate and distinct
Okay.
inquiries.
And is this only, I mean, can this be on, is it just on housing, or can it be on, business? or
Commercial.
Anything?
Yes,
Anything.
any, in this context, any rezoning application, any variance, request, and even in the initial phase of zoning compliance, they're seeking, conformity with the existing zoning code.
Well, I'll jump right in and say, when this originally came up, and the reason it came up, I totally didn't agree with it, because, and I noticed you didn't even use the term TIA, but this is kind of on the heels of the TIA, but.
I think so.
Um,
They're certainly
yeah,
connected.
Yeah, they're definitely connected. So, we've been using TIAs for how long now? In this county?
Many years.
And now all of a sudden, after many years, we're saying a TIA is probably not enough when we've had, what, 100 or so, hundreds of developments, hundreds of commercial development, hundreds of residential developments, and now, and I'll just put it out here because this was arose and tried to get forced down our throats because somebody was trying to ultimately delay a development, wanted to throw another roadblock in there. And my sentiments was, we made this person jump through hoops, and here's another obstacle you're trying to throw at them. And the applicant ultimately agreed because they wanted to do the development. They had deep enough pockets to say, hey, I'll do it. But it shouldn't come down to that being the case on the table. I don't want it to be something that council says, hey, get them to do this. If staff feels this needs to be done or put into play, I want it to come from a staff level and not from a council member saying, I want to see an enhanced study. But if we're saying that staff is going to make this determination, I'm all for it. But we don't want to create a situation where council members can call up and say, hey, let's get I'm gonna call it an enhanced TIA study, because TIAs cost what now?
10,000.
You know,
More for
yeah.
tier 2, much higher
And-
than that for tier 2.
So, and I've always been a proponent of saying, every time we do these things, we're increasing the cost of doing business. And if you're telling me TIA has been accepted for many years, and I've been on here, it's my 13th year, we've never had a situation come up until last year that somebody says, what about, I don't like the idea that we're adding more layers of scrutiny for us to tell somebody no, run the cost up, and then the end game is sometimes still telling the person no, you're not going. This will give us another tool to say no, we don't want to approve that, and I don't want that to be the case on the heels of adding another layer to what we've accepted for many years, and it's worked fine, it's worked beautifully, but we got to stop pandering to a certain clientele, a certain group of people who continuously wants to look for reasons to say no. But I guarantee you, if we implement this, we're gonna have every single commercial developer take that extra step. And I don't think it adds that much more assurity to us. Now, if it's a bad road, obviously, we know if a road needs to be widened for 18-wheeler to come in and out. But I don't think this is gonna give us that, when somebody can go out and eyeball, yeah, we need to do some traffic mitigation, because we already know if someone needs to add a acceleration lane or a decel lane, that's common knowledge. But I don't think we'll get enough extra details out of the money that we're gonna have people spend to do this. I don't really like the idea. I don't like how it started, actually. If this would have been something staff would have threw up, that we really need to start leaning this way or making a move towards, but I know that wasn't the case for this coming up. So I'm not gonna support adding an extra layer to before we approve. So I don't like the idea.
Can I ask you a question? I
Go
mean,
ahead.
You said something about who would require the studies, but is that specified in the agreement? I mean, in the ordinance?
Yeah, so in the ordinance currently, as I think Michael started out with saying, so from a zoning compliance standpoint, and for any of these applications, that we as staff can request technical reports and studies currently in the current ordinance. And they're not just limited to impacts on the road. They could include things like a parking study, environmental impact, and noise. And noise is relevant. We met with a developer that they might have some noise impacts. And they said, well, do we have to do a noise study? I said, well, if you do one now, I don't have to ask for one later, so you might as well do it now. So things like that. For rezoning applications, the planning commission has a statutory deadline about when they need to give a recommendation on those. So they can't ask for a study because they need to give an opinion in short order. But for county council, there's language about when county council or the zoning board wants one of these technical studies, they can ask for it. They can, but they do have to state in writing what the questions they want answered are, and a timeline to get that report back.
So that's already in the ordinance now, that council can ask for this.
That's right.
Now,
In a limited context, excuse me, I'm
Right.
sorry, I know it just came in. This is expanding the scope of the application.
Right. Right now, they're limited to, for rezonings, they're limited to those special districts. So the PDs, the MUs, and the BTs.
So I think I see Bump's point, and how it came up. We're past that, which is a good thing. But I think that, I would be more comfortable with it if we had been using it all along for some things. I don't know what we have used it for and what we haven't, but.
But this is new. I mean, it's relatively new with
Okay.
Recode.
Okay, so one of my concerns, and when I do think that this would be a good thing to have, would be, and I only say this because the impact of a couple of things that have happened in my district that could have been avoided had we had this study. As long as this study allows us to ensure the mitigation for whatever comes up. But we've got 2 concrete plants that I don't know how we say to the people that are wanting to put in the concrete plants, you're going to have to widen that road because we've got 18-wheelers turning in, and now there's a big ditch off on the side of the road, and it's full of mud, and it's full of dirt, and it's just full of water. It's a big puddle, but it's not on the road because when they turn in, it's way out to the side. So I think this is the type of study that would catch that and say, hey, this is going to be the problem when we've got these 18-wheelers turning in, and this road is it's a small 2-lane road, no curb and gutter, no nothing. But we've got 2 of those situations that are within a quarter mile of each other. And if this study would have eliminated a problem, or if we would have been able to mitigate that, you know, I mean, the owner goes out there and throws some gravel in it every once in a while because he knows I'm watching it. But that doesn't solve the problem. It just sloshes back out. So, but if this is the type of thing that would have allowed us to mitigate something, you know, for those two little roads, then I would support this. I do not think this should be used as a deterrent for anything. I mean, just because you don't want something, let's not try to make somebody, you know, jump through hoops for something just because you don't want it. It's, you know, we control that with zoning and other things, but I can see where this in a rare case would maybe be a benefit.
Let me ask you
Something
this.
like that.
How long have those concrete plants been there?
One of them was approved in 2016 right before I got on council, and the other one was approved probably the year before. They both were approved kind of pretty close together.
So we're gonna leave this a while back. Probably wouldn't stop the ditch from forming, because you can see 18-wheelers, I don't care how wide the road, somehow they're gonna find one of those tires, two of those tires, or four of those tires are gonna come off that road. But
Well, so the issue with this one is, so if this is one road and this is this road, so you got an intersection, and that concrete plant is right here. So those trucks don't even have room to turn in. Honestly, their entrance should have been further down, because they don't actually even have time, they don't have the space to come and make the turn to
Right.
get in.
Right.
So they're hitting on two sides of that
the
road.
entrance is in a bad spot.
The entrance is a very bad spot,
Gotcha.
yes.
I see
But
that.
this would have maybe said, hey, the mitigation for this is to move that entrance down a little bit, or, you know, I don't
Okay,
know.
so,
It could be as simple as that, that's right.
It's very
Yeah.
simple. To me, this is a little step that it should be used as a little step. That's kind of how I look at it.
okay, so a comment. I'm gonna jump just a little bit. Is that allowed or not?
Don't jump to that bottom thing without down there
Okay.
yet.
Well, I'm just gonna make a comment. Okay, my comment is, if we did hypothetically looked at some changes or requirements, something with the TIAs, could that take in this?
What, the
I
study?
mean, could it be, could you sort of combine that, or that has to stay out there by itself?
Well, the TIA is gonna be the TIA.
Yeah, the TIA is a term of art with a specific meaning. For instance, here, we already have engineering studies, so traffic engineering, it could fall within that already. It's just gonna expound upon the itemized studies that are permissive. And then a TIA, the sufficiency of the road design is not necessarily what the TIA addresses. It talks about flow and truck trips, car trips, and it has a more narrow, or at least has a different examination point.
Right, so for example, a TIA is on the list of technical reports that can be asked for. So a lot of projects already require one by ordinance, but if one is not required by ordinance, council has the ability to ask for that. So right now, rezonings do not require a TIA, but if it were a sufficiently large project that you all had concerns about what the traffic is, and you didn't want to wait for that to come to the site plan level, you could ask for the TIA at that point.
And we haven't really abused that. I mean, that hasn't, because I kind of forgot that was an option, so I'm thinking, no, not really. But I mean, we haven't, it's not like we're trying to deter, I don't think we're trying to deter things. I think we're just trying to get more information for longer term, what mitigation might be longer term
Yeah.
needs. That's my guess, but.
I mean, I can see the value of this, because I've got a situation also, which I could show you. And my,
That's what I'm coming to see
exactly.
on Friday.
Yes. And this would have addressed that. Not a TIA, but this. I think.
Well, we'll move it back to the full council.
Hmm?
So we'll move this back to the full council.
Do we need to vote? Do we need to vote
I
on?
would vote the favorable vote out.
Okay. Okay, so I'll make a motion to, on the technical studies, I guess that's an ordinance, on the technical studies ordinance that we, I would vote to approve that, and then it would bring that back to full council for, probably more discussion.
Okay. Do I have a second?
I'll second, even though I'm gonna vote against it. I won't hold up the progress, but I'm a team player.
Well, I mean, hey,
Hey,
vote your conscience.
we'll do it.
Okay, so all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
No.
Okay, so let's go on here. Now, we are going to talk about, have a discussion about event venues. Allison, where are we on event venues?
Well, we are still working on event venues, solutions for event venues, agritourism related event venues. However, I think in talking to Jonathan, we've got something that we can bring to council that will loosen some things up for these venues while we're still looking at more options. But is that what you recommend, Jonathan? That we get that? It's got to come to the planning commission.
Yeah, so we have, past the tree stuff, we've got all of the same event venue zoning stuff that we've been looking at for a while now. And this is everything that the committee had asked for in terms of making it easier to get an approved event venue. And so I feel confident we've done everything we can, and that you've asked us to do in the zoning code, and that we would ask you to go ahead and move that forward, and we can take it to planning commission and for council to vote on, so folks can start to move towards coming into compliance for those that are currently in violation. This is distinct from issues that they might have with the building code.
I know this has been before several times. Have we kind of basically shut that down? Has everyone just kind of sitting idle till we hash this out, or?
So we have, I don't know how many total cases. We have a bunch of violations, and they're sitting in limbo because the council has been working on making a change that would either allow them to operate as they are or move forward with some type of approval, whether that's going to the zoning board or getting a zoning compliance from staff as this kind of outlines. So those are all in limbo currently.
So what kind of fines have we given anybody fines, or we just kind of issued violations?
They have violations.
No fines?
No fines.
Okay.
So if we approve this, then some of those people will no longer be in violation. Is that,
I don't know
right?
about that.
Okay.
So they would, and I think the easy answer is no. So they would have the option of, depending on their capacity size and where they're located and how big of a property we're talking about, some of them would have the opportunity to come to staff and get a zoning compliance approval, and others, if they're larger, would have to go forward with the special exception process as they would now.
But they can't now, or can they now?
They can now. They've been able to pursue a special exception since event venues were allowed in the zoning code
Yeah.
about many years ago.
Has anyone done that?
Yeah, we've had a couple, and we even had one in December that was recently approved for a special exception.
And did
That
that
was
solve?
that was a brand new one.
Did that solve all of their issues? Is
They had no structures on the site, so that was a brand new one.
Okay.
That was easy to prove, no
Yeah.
structure.
Yeah, okay. I think this is a start, and I think there's more to come, especially for those that are legitimately agricultural related. So we're working with the Commissioner of Agriculture, not agritourism. There's no Commissioner of Agritourism, but the Commissioner of Agriculture, and just to look and see what some of the other counties have done. In some of the areas where things seem to be, we seem to be kind of against we're against building code. So we got it's kind of a catch-22, kind of between a rock and a hard place in some of those instances. So that's what we'd like to look at.
I would, for Dan, I would love to see someone's actual ordinance addressing this from another county.
That's what we're working
You
on
know,
that.
I would love to see that.
Yeah, me
because
too.
I don't want to be up here when other areas have shown that we can be a lot lower in our requirements, and it works. I mean, we all want the Cadillac of everything. We want the best ordinances, we want the best facilities, we want the best roads, we want the cheapest taxes. Sometimes it's just not logical for us to always be up here. Let's scale it back and allow things to work. But we're not sacrifice life, safety when it comes to this situation, I'll say it that way.
Debbie, call him Dan Blue, he's got something, a question in the back.
Dangerous
Can I,
question.
can I ask for clarification from Jonathan? You had the, question about the special exception that was approved, and did that green light their project? You said there's no building on the site, so, but, and I don't know if your question meant for that project or others that have received special exception approval. We have some of those, correct, that have received those, and they still have building code issues, so they would not be resolved by the special exception. Is that accurate?
We probably have a handful that have gotten special exception approval, and there's at least two I can think of off the top of my head who have special exception approval, have building code issues, life safety issues related to
So they
fire
would still have issues to
Still
resolve.
got something to resolve.
Correct. They have existing structures on the site. The one that Jonathan just referenced is a undeveloped piece of property. Gentleman's gonna move there, live there, build his house there, and build a new structure. He intends to meet all building code requirements for his facility and go forward that way.
Is it possible for us to get a list of all of the ones that are under violation and which ones will probably be able to operate with this approved, which ones which ones have like building code issues
The only
and,
way for us to give you a list that would have all that information if they were to all apply.
or if they were to all apply, but we know what their
They would have to give
violations
us-
are.
We know what their violations are, that's right, but we don't know to what extent, if this is passed, that they would be done. Because we don't
Okay.
know until
All
they
the
submit their building plans, if they
Right.
meet code or not.
So can we get a list of the ones that are under violation and what the violations are?
Yeah, I was gonna say, I'd like to know what the violations are, that way we can kind of work backwards
Yeah,
to see what.
because I'd like to be
we
able to
need
hand
address.
that to this attorney and say, hey, here's where we are and how do we fix this in other areas.
Not the building code ones.
No,
We don't
whatever
know.
we have violations are.
The violation is that they have a use violation. They have a use that is not permitted on the site without a special exception. That's the
Oh, okay.
violation.
Okay, that's the violation, okay.
So how do we know how do we know what's holding them up? I mean, how do we know what building code's
We
holding
don't
them
until-
up?
We don't know the building codes, we know they're in violation.
I know
because
we
they
have.
For the special
there's-
exception.
Oh, God, what was the one off of Campbell Road? They submitted building plans,
Four
I
Leaf?
think. Yeah, Four Leaf. It was a Amish barn that they
Yeah.
moved down from
I
Pennsylvania.
don't know
and
if they
that-
ever got around
they-
to submitting building codes. We met with the architect on it and they were working on building,
And they've
a set
never
of plans,
submitted
but
anything.
I think it was sold in the middle of all that.
It was.
And, so I don't know that we've got a full set.
The same thing with Iron Gate. I believe we
Iron
worked
Gate,
with them.
yeah,
and-
Iron Gate did,
yeah.
they went before the Board of Appeals, but we
They
haven't
still haven't
received
submitted
anything
anything.
back from them since they granted their appeal.
And one that's under violation, I believe we've met with, and they may fit under the smaller event venue use in the zoning code. And Jamie's met with them and discussed, some of their building code stuff, and it was rather minimal without one. And it was another event venue that doesn't even really have a structure on the property.
So that's on track, not too long.
Okay, move it on.
I think that's about it.
So have we looked at what other counties have done? Do we have examples of what they've
We
done?
talked to some other ones, other counties around us and things like that, and you get an answer, it just varies really. There's no one, there's not, there's lean on. I think Spartanburg maybe has a written
Do we need to make a
ordinance, I'm
motion on
not sure.
this?
They're the ones that,
No,
they
no,
kind
not this one.
of, the ones that kind of started a lot of this
Yeah.
actually, but,
I think council, one of the things that council's mentioned multiple times is we want to help small businesses, and I personally, I look at these as small businesses, so if we can start there, Spartanburg does have an ordinance written, that's one of the ones, the examples that
Okay.
they're gonna be sending me, but I think, are we able to reach out and get that and just compare that to
Damn, but-
kind of to where we are? I mean,
yeah. I
see
think
what
we've
have
seen
they
it.
done about this? So you're having to follow a certain standard, they have the same standard, because it's state building code.
Should have.
But, so what have they done that's different than what we've done? You know, like, have they done things that we would not consider, legal or doable, or what have they?
Probably yes, ma'am.
Yeah,
They
okay.
have things that I don't know how they were able to qualify.
Yeah. So what I'm saying is this, Jamie, if the Commissioner of Agriculture is concerned about this, then he's gonna help us with, I mean, if he can help us with building code, then, or if their attorney can tell us the interpretation for building code that's different than how we may be interpreting that allows this, then it kind of falls on them to do that. So that's my question, because that's gonna be my question for them, is how are these counties able to do this and York County's not, and you know, what's the difference in the interpretation of the law on that? So,
They probably assume a little more risk in those other counties than we would want to expose people to.
they very well, you know, may. I mean, we might be right back here talking about this exact same thing, you know, over and over again. But I mean, I'd like to have that homework. I'd like to have that, because when they finally do call me back and say, yes, we can meet, whenever that's gonna be, then.
Okay, Dan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I just so I understand what the recommendation from staff is on this, because there has been discussions of different ways to accommodate existing small businesses, and things like, for instance, intermittent use or temporary use designations, those kinds of things. If they're only doing, 10 of these a year, 10 events a year, does that put them in a different category? What I'm hearing is that what the staff is asking to move forward is the proposal that they introduced at the last meeting, which was just, there was a capacity issue that differentiated between administrative approval and a special exception approval. But other than that, they just all treated with the same, whether they're intermittent, new construction, existing construction, or that there wasn't any differentiation. Is that where we are with this? Just so we understand? Okay. So, those would all be issues that my client, and I think some of the others who've been to these meetings, would want to continue to have discussions about.
Yes.
Is there some accommodation that would fit within the statutory requirements of the state and the regulatory requirements and the building code, but wouldn't be quite so burdensome on, a mom and pop business that is?
Yeah, I think there's a line somewhere between agritourism and commercial. I think somewhere in there,
Well, I tell you, I think
there's some middle
if you look at
ground.
the definition of agritourism, I think all of these places might qualify for it, but that doesn't answer all the questions. We understand that, but I think there was at least some questions whether some other counties might have differentiated between
Yes.
a temporary use or, something that would only have, a limited number of events per year versus one that would be more regularly used.
Mhm.
Okay.
We're good.
Okay, so I think at this point, we need to at least do this. And so I think, I'm gonna make a motion to approve this. This will have to come back before, planning
Staff
commission
changes.
and then to council. Just,
We're approving staff changes.
mhm,
All right, second.
yep.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye. Since I just raised my hand, I was down at the Chester City Council meeting, and every single vote that they take, they have to say aye and raise their right hand. I'm like, that is so weird. We won't be doing that.
No.
I just saw it.
Okay.
Both of us, we all
Just
raised our hand. I'm like,
Just a sidebar, that's a
Yeah, that's a
sidebar.
sidebar, yeah.
Okay, all right. Okay, so now we are going to, talk. Jonathan, do you have an update for us on the gravel, regarding new gravel roads?
So we met with the committee last time, and there was a discussion last time. Staff doesn't have any proposed ordinance for gravel roads. I think the discussion was, what does county council want to see in terms of allowing new gravel roads to be built in the county?
and I say we don't. And the reason why, because eventually if we allow someone to develop a subdivision, any kind of subdivision, any kind of 2 or 3 road cutaway, eventually those residents are gonna come to York County and say, why is my road gravel? It may be the 3rd homeowner that comes to a meeting or says, why is my road gravel? And if we did, me and Allison had a brief discussion about this. If we get even anywhere close to doing this, it's got to be in the deed. They're not gonna get a tax break, and it will say York County would never pave this road. So if anybody wants to live under those conditions, that's probably about the only way we could see allowing someone to develop just on gravel roads. Because I know we still got people who are living on gravel roads whose roads were supposed to be paved years ago, still trying to get their roads paved. And one of them is, in my mind, is Bookout Road out here. supposed to have been paved years ago, still hadn't been paved. I can't answer why, but that's what we'll be looking at. Everybody, it may be the first several people who own that home may understand, but that third and fourth person, 15 years down the road, 20 years down the road, why is my road not being paved? I pay the same taxes everybody else pays. But if it's going to be something in the deed that's going to permanently say York County would never pave this road, you're not going to get a tax break, and we can address all those kind of concerns that we know are going to come up down the road, that would probably be the only condition that I would say allow it to happen.
So, and I agree. So my question is how do we make this, how do we make it a possibility with basically those conditions on it? You know, if somebody comes, and I'm talking, I know there's one in particular that's, you know, looking at doing pretty large lots. And so, you know, that has some appeal, and I understand wanting to incentivize that for someone, you know, who's maybe they're gonna build 5 or 10 acre lots. You know, Old York Farms is a great example of Old York Farms. They have gravel driveways. They don't have because they all turn off of the main road, so they don't have gravel roads, you know, connecting them once you get in. So I'm not really opposed to those, if they did, if Old York Farms looked differently and they had, you know, 8 houses there and they were all on 5 acre lots, you know what, if they want a gravel driveway in and out, that doesn't really bother me. But what does bother me is exactly what bothers Bump, and that is that, oh my gosh, we get so many complaints about gravel roads that ultimately somebody living there is they're going to have an issue, and one of two issues. They're going to have an issue with the gravel roads, and they're going to want the county to pave them, or we're going to have 5 out of 6 neighbors willing to put in to pave them themselves, and then you've still, you know, which doesn't really bother us, but it's still, involve us, but it's still a problem. So it's kind of like it's a you know, problem looking for a place to happen, kind of. But I don't want to say we would never do that. So how do we make it possible for somebody to come in and propose something like that without just being told, you absolutely can't do that no matter what?
Yeah, and if there's an interest in doing some sort of limited amendment to allow them under very certain circumstances, you can tell us what you'd like those circumstances to be, what parameters are yes, what parameters are no, and we can cobble that together in the form of an ordinance amendment.
We would have to think of everything from A to Z to make sure this thing is ironclad, because I just see a can of worms, but if we can make it ironclad that this is not gonna fall back in our laps anyway, 10, 15 years down the road, because it's just like a private road, and you got several people living on a private road. And my parents was in this situation where they wanted to keep the crush and run fresh, up to date. Neighbor didn't want to chip in to help.
Right.
So at that point, it's like, Mom, Dad, do y'all want to keep it looking and bear the cost of the whole situation? Because your neighbor's not wanting to chip in. And so you're going to get those, somebody's going to say, well, I drive an old beat up truck anyway. I don't care if I dip down every 5 feet going home. Somebody's going to have a nice car that wants to, you know, keep it nice and pristine. They're going to, and that stuff costs. You know, fresh, putting crush and run, putting rock out. We'll see that situation, because if me and you lived on that road, you know how neighbors can't even get along when they're this close together, let alone, you know, so those are the kind of situations that I could see coming up.
I did
Because
live on one of those in Lancaster County.
That's why you moved to York County, 'cause we had paved roads.
Exactly. I knew where to come.
Bob, I think you identified a pretty important con to adding something like this, and that even if you write out any liability on the part of the county, by allowing a gravel road to be constructed, you'd be facilitating the neighborhood dispute at some point. Maybe everyone that buys in originally
Couldn't be
is
the
good.
first
Yeah,
time.
they're good.
They're
They're happy.
happy. But, you know, their descendants or people that they might sell the property to, eventually the maintenance is gonna fall off of the gravel road itself. Even if it never gets paved, or they never pool together money to get it paved, eventually there's gonna be a dispute about, they haven't paid in, and there are gonna be lawsuits, and the county will be facilitating that by allowing it in the first place.
So,
Gotta be careful with that one.
are you gonna say anything? I'll just make a motion then because there's a lot of pressure on the three of us here, I would make a motion that we bring this to the full council and have that discussion where, you know, the council people that are for it aren't here. So we could have that full discussion and council can hear from everybody, whether they're pro or con. And we can take this off of a future agenda probably.
Well, I'm not under any pressure.
You're not.
No.
Do you think we should, okay, so what do you want to do? We're just gonna make a motion to not recommend it, or do you want to make a motion?
I'm a firm believer.
You make the motion.
I'll make the motion that
okay.
we deny entertaining any gravel road options in York County.
Okay, I'll second that.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. You raised your hand.
Oh.
I did too. You,
That counts
hey,
me- that
you
counts me
started
laying
it.
off on me.
That's why, you started it. That's why we're doing it.
Okay,
We're following the leader.
So,
okay. So now, looks like Diane has something for us.
I figured you'd be sick of me talking by now, so I let Diane.
yeah, let Diane take over a little bit.
Yeah,
I
man.
get to talk now. I get to bring it
Yay.
home.
Okay. Circle the wagons.
There
You're
we
gonna
go.
circle the wagons, okay.
So a little while back, council asked staff to be able to kind of review our existing TIA policies and procedures. And you all are very familiar with how this works and everything, but I just want to kind of give you an overview of, just a reminder of where we use TIAs and how they apply. We use them for preliminary plats, any kind of subdivision plans for residential, multifamily new developments coming in, for rezoning for special districts, and as well as special exceptions for any kind of use application. Those are the 4 areas we use right now for TIAs. There are, we have 3 tiers. Recode, as I mentioned here, that today is anniversary of Recode.
Yay.
Happy birthday, Recode. 1 year today.
I cannot believe that. Whew.
And so, because of that, they brought in the tier 0, which these are projects where the trip counts are so low that we don't need to do any kind of a TIA. So we've established that number for it, and therefore requires no further study. We have tier 1s and we have tier 2s. And so as part of our review, we looked over the past 12 years to figure out what have we received so far this year, what kind of tiers are we getting, tier 1s or 2 tiers or 0s, and what are we actually achieving from those tier 1s. And so we had, this past 12 months, we had 48 TIAs received. Of those, 4 were 0, 14 were tier 1, and 30 of them were tier 2. And so, obviously the tier 0s, we just go away, nothing to do with that one there. And from the 14 tier 1s that we received, only 1 of those 14 had some kind of mitigation, or they were examining based upon the trips they were going to be affecting a nearby intersection and requiring some kind of improvements. So of those 14, 1 had improvements. The other 13, there was no recommended approvals or improvements for it. So they were just, nothing happened from those other 13 TIAs. In tier 2, we had 30 of those TIAs. And a lot of those were some kind of restriping or turn lane, something simple like that to the actual developments. 11 of those required some kind of a mitigation agreement where they had to go to council and agree to pay their proportional share for an improvement in the future, whether it's intersection improvements. That's typically how it's done. And then, so the purpose here was to be able to look and figure out, are we the right place? Is the TIAs and the tier levels working well for us to make any kind of modifications to them? Staff looking at the tier 1s, by having 14 of those and 13 of those TIA tier 1s, there was no improvement required. And therefore, maybe we need to adjust those thresholds to be able to step up the 0 to a little bit higher. Before we can incur some kind of a cost and a time implication because of that. Let them just go from the higher tier 1 becomes a tier 0. But include some kind of language in that where if this is located where we already have a high impact intersections, to require them to do it tier 1. So if we know it's a bad location, but the trips itself aren't generating that, we should go ahead and have them do tier 1 just in case. And so we'd include that one. For the tier 2s, we think that they're working well. We don't want any changes to that in terms of the thresholds and when we're actually going to be requiring a tier 2, but possibly consider some expansion of them to internal movement. So right now, City of Rock Hill, they utilize their tier 2s to be able to examine internal movement within a development. Maybe it's some kind of either internal turn lanes or roundabouts. And so we might be able to expand those tier twos to go besides just the generation of trips externally. So that's kind of what we wanted to bring forward to you, to see if you had any concerns or comments about the TI, how it's working, what you've heard, and then possibly consider going forward with some changes.
Oh, can I say, I'm just gonna jump there real fast. I'll
Jump, Debbie,
forget
jump.
if I don't.
Jump, Debbie, jump.
Okay, so tier two, can, so you're saying would that, do work on roundabouts?
Well, maybe
In
some kind of
general?
internal instruction for the, construction for the development. So maybe they could do something to the site. They will look at how the traffic movement internal to a development in addition to what we're doing right now. So look at City of Rock Hill and what they're doing and how it's working for them, and
Okay.
consider doing some kind of a modification for that.
Okay.
We'd like
Do you
to
have
see-
anything in place right now?
We don't, no, we don't have that kind of, that.
Because everybody loves
requirement in place.
roundabouts.
It's not just roundabouts, it's turn lanes, it's different kinds of intersection improvements internal to a site.
Yeah,
So we would look at that and kind of, if you like that, we would consider that and kind of go back and do some research on that and bring
okay.
forward something if you
I
would
like that, okay. Okay,
I think it's
next.
definitely something that we could entertain if y'all think adjusting the 0 and the 1 tiers when it's required. I think that's perfect, because like you noticed, very little changes had to be taken care of
Right.
at that lower level. So if we
Mm-hmm.
can increase the
The
widen the
threshold.
range, the threshold, yeah. Because what's the average cost of a TIA nowadays?
For a tier one, it's in the low thousands for a tier one, and then higher obviously for a tier two. Is required.
So basically a vacation for a family of 4. Gotcha, okay.
So I think it's very smart to reevaluate this and look at that. What's not on this are the ones who chose to go outside of York County, not even do the traffic study, and there are some of those.
What do you mean? The traffic study ran them off?
Yeah, yes, 2 of them went to, Cherokee County. So, one of those was a church from Sharon that was trying to expand, and they ended up moving. And then Imagine Church, they actually did stay in Lake Wiley, but they had some difficulty just with the traffic study and where they were. So my question, looking at just those 2 examples, one of those was, and I don't know where this plays into TIA and what's required TIA, but one of those was, well, let me just say it like this: 399 trips in an area like Fort Mill, Lake Wiley. That's a lot of additional people. But so, and the church that was trying to expand in Sharon had like no traffic. So the TIA, they that was one, and then there was another one that was going to move out way out Highway 55. Way out in District 3, and there's like nothing anywhere around, but they were having to do a TIA, and my thought was, oh my gosh, they need to have some traffic on that road, but I don't know how that plays into who's required to do a TIA, and maybe it doesn't, but the thresholds are relative to where they are, kind of in a way, maybe. I don't.
Trips are trips. So obviously, if you're in an area where it's very, very rural, you're probably not going to be doing any kind of outside mitigation. You're not going to be fixing some other turn or any kind of intersections, but you might have to put in a turn lane or something on your site itself because you're creating trips within that. So whether it's happening in Sharon, whether it's happening in Fort Mill, you're still creating trips, and you're going to require something from that. The TIA will discover that need, and that's why it's important to have it no matter where you are, because a trip is a trip.
Question.
Okay.
You finish?
Yeah.
So the first thing I wrote down was, we should not be requiring a TIA anywhere in Sharon. That's first off. So when it comes to requiring a TIA, so if we did one at this location, and then 6 months later, a year later, Jonathan want to open up down the street at the QT or the bread store, are we going to require him to do another one if it's in the same line of traffic? When do we say, well, we just had one 6 months ago or 3 months ago in the same line?
Right, because what you're looking at is what this development is doing to create new trips. So you have to look at what their impact is going to be on the network. So yeah, you have to do each individual one. A lot of times they will go and pull from a previously done recent TIA to
Right.
kind of pull some of that number, some of the counts from that as well, to be able to utilize those. But we have to look each individual one and what the trips they're generating from their business.
Because I'm thinking about a business, because if I'm gonna locate close to Jonathan's business, I'm like, you know, it's probably gonna be a high traffic as far as, some areas will be high traffic naturally, because business want to jump in where traffic's already existing to take advantage of the traffic flow. If you're
So-
out somewhere creating new trips,
But
I think
one
that's a
example of that too is you all approve many mitigation agreements. You'll see them on the agenda,
Yeah.
approve those. In many of those cases where we have an approved, plan to improve an intersection, but we need to be able to get some money to help improve that intersection. So we have different developments coming in and they're paying their proportional share. So they're each doing their TIA, determining what their impact is on that intersection, and paying their proportional share for their increase. And so that's why, if we didn't do that guy, well, he needs to pay money too, because he's making some also trips in that intersection. And that's why we have to keep doing those, each individual one.
And the people doing the TIAs, they're the ones that really are benefiting from what we're doing. So the fewer, I mean, I do think that the fewer that are required,
right?
the better. I'm just trying to figure out though how density weighs into this, because it really, I mean, the impact is bigger in some areas than others. So I'm just trying to figure, I mean,
And that comes through in the resulting mitigation. So if an area has very little traffic, and a development comes in, and maybe there's an unsignalized intersection that some of those trips are gonna be utilizing, the results might say, well, now you've created so much traffic in this area that really has none, and now a signal is needed at this intersection. Or if there is a signal there, and the traffic is low, and they're coming into a rural area, the results will say, well, the intersection's fine before and after your development, you don't need to do any mitigation. But if you're in an area.
but they've paid a lot. They've paid in some cases a lot. They've paid for that.
Yes,
for that
they
study.
need to do that in order for us to know what the answer is. And so what we're talking about is potentially raising the bar for that tier 1 above 100 daily trips, or adjusting the peaks as well. That you would have fewer of those smaller projects that need to go out and spend to do it.
Yeah, I'm definitely in favor of that
Yeah.
part of it.
So I guess we will look for you guys to make a recommendation as to how to adjust the
Yes.
thresholds for these.
Yeah, and we'd ask if you vote, and then we can start working on bringing something together. Because if you vote and it's not something the council's interested in, then we won't spend the time working on it.
Well, I make the motion that we allow staff to move forward and bring back some numbers to adjust the thresholds for the TIAs.
Does that come back to us, or does that come back to council at this point? Would that come back to us?
Them.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
we'll bring some more.
Okay. I'll second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
I didn't raise
We
my
didn't
We
raise
hand.
our
didn't.
hands.
Okay, so do I have a motion?
Motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
Second. Aye.
Aye.
Okay. All right.
Debbie, you run a fine meeting.
Thank you.
They didn't ask anybody why they were here, but
Anytime you want to meet, just let me know.